We're about to hear why most frameworks fail long before anyone gets to hear them, and it's got nothing to do with the ideas inside them. Susanna Reay puts it bluntly: build a personal brand without something underneath it, and most experts end up in a little puddle on the floor. She spent over 2 decades working with speakers and experts on exactly this problem, and even she didn't get her own framework right on the first attempt. When she first sketched it out, it was a square with 4 boxes. She scrapped it. What she rebuilt it into, and why, is one of those small decisions that changes how people remember you long after you've left the room. Welcome to Professional Speaking, the show for people who are serious about speaking and becoming known, booked, and paid. My name's John Ball, professional speaking coach, keynote speaker, stand-up comedian, and sci-fi nerd. I'm here as your guide on the journey to a successful speaking career. Well, listen, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome one of my friends to the show today, and we're going to be talking about a very important element which we just haven't discussed much on the show before: frameworks. So let me welcome the framework thinking expert, Susanna Reay.
Hello, and it is such a pleasure to join you, John, on this lovely day.
Susanna, I've been looking forward to having you on the show because I think this is a really important element that we just haven't got to on the show before. And I can't believe that in all the years I've been making the show that we haven't really covered this topic, but you do cover it really well. And I'd just like to get a sense from you, like, one of the things I often like to ask my guests is whether you have a particular viewpoint or stance that relates to what you do that might be a bit contrarian to, well, probably different to what other people are teaching out there and have heard before.
Oh, I do. And I call this like the hill I'm likely to die on. And it's my framework first principle. And this is from seeing the last 10 years that there's been a massive push in personal branding, like visibility, content. You've got to be out there. And most experts end up in a little puddle on the floor as a result. Because what I see, and for me, this is the difference between a personal brand and authority brand, is a personal brand. Yes, it's about you, your personality, how you present, how you are. But the reality of it is if people don't understand what your framework, your intellectual property, your unique ideas are, and those stay with them after you've been in the room, then it just diminishes. And the difference with an authority brand is they have that framework. They've worked on the framework first, their IP, because then when the person leaves the room, and particularly if they've presented this visually, they're far more remembered. The ideas percolate through their heads and they really build their authority, and recognition comes from their ideas just as much as a personality. I'm not saying no personality here, by the way. I am saying that you want to build beyond having just a pure personal brand. It needs substance behind it. And that's why I'm always about framework first, visibility second.
Yeah, it's an idea that I have perhaps not pushed as strongly as you do, but I've always talked about with my speaker clients about the importance of having those frameworks and what they do, especially if they're looking to do coaching and workshops alongside what they're doing on the stage from speaking. But having those elements be that bit more memorable, I think is actually when I started reading your book, one of the things that became very clear to me was about how you really are developing that sense of clarity that a lot of people end up finding themselves feeling like they're starting over and over again every single time. Whereas when you actually have these frameworks, you don't have to do that. That's really important for people to get.
Oh God, you get stuck in this eternal content trap and visibility if you don't have that framework. Because what a framework does is it doesn't like lock you in. One of the biggest objections that people come to me, they go, "Oh, Susanna, framework, does that mean it's like a box I've got to stay within?" Because many experts, speakers, they're polymaths. They've got many ideas. And I'm like, no, not at all. What it is the framework stabilizes what you're doing and what you're putting out there. And one of my favorite analogies that always lands really well with listeners is when you think of an umbrella. So an umbrella in its essence is a spoke, a central handle, and the multiple spokes, depending on how many are on there, and some loose fabric. Separately, they don't really do much. They don't mean anything. When it's brought together into an umbrella, it now has a structure. It's also got a use and a form. And the thing is, an umbrella can be used in multiple ways. We're not saying it has to be used in one way. It might depend on the conditions, the weather. So you might use it as a rain umbrella. You might use it as a sun umbrella. You'll hold it at different angles. And also, if you think about the areas, the sections of the fabric that you would see on the top of an umbrella, and I've got a lovely rainbow umbrella. So I'm always like, if I use this, I'll be pointing at the different colors as a prop, because I love props when you're speaking as well. I think it brings the stage more to life. But each of those areas are different areas that you might do or speak about, but you don't always have to angle it over everything, because that could be overwhelming. You might bring it to one angle and you might focus on the blues or greens. On another day, maybe the reds and oranges and yellows, dependent who you're speaking to. And that is the beauty when you've got the right framework. It's got this real structure to it that you can, as you say, you can bounce back to all the time. So if you wake up on one of those days, and we all have them, when we go, what am I going to do today? You can look to your framework and go, I haven't spoken about this element for a while. Let me shine a light on that piece. That is important. So the umbrella analogy, I think, really helps people understand how a framework should work.
And look, that's in a way, I think I am myself, I'm picturing that umbrella, it's like you're creating that visual framework thinking for us there. But I really get that. I get the connection to it. And I think you explain that really well. It's like, it doesn't lock you in. You can move it around, you can play with it, you can angle it to as best suits you, which is very important, especially for speakers who are using this. I know you work with a lot of speakers and coaches, so you're a perfect guest for this kind of show, really. One of the things I think that it also perhaps does, which I think a lot of people struggle with, is, you say, we create a lot of content these days. And often we are doing coaching, we're doing speaking, we're doing other aspects of business as well. Keeping all these elements in your head is very, very difficult. And so having things that are clarified for your audience also clarifies it for us, right?
Oh, totally. It's a win-win on both sides. And for me, a great framework, what I call an authority framework, is one that serves every piece of your business, from that first opening all the way through to your high-end bespoke work, because every element is really important. And what I feel is many people get lost because they don't center on what they're really good at as well. They might lean more into the market of like, oh, but I've seen someone else sell this, I could do that. And then they go off on this side quest that doesn't benefit them. So instead, by going, actually, no, this is my central work. This is where I really hold my power and my energy and that support to help others with the transformation. Then that helps bring the clarity to the audience as much as yourself. Because yes, many of us can do, like, I can do many, many things, but where do I really gain my energy? Where do I really want to focus? And this is a core piece of the work I do with clients, because I have my trademark Spark process, and the S in that starts with self. Because if we don't connect with our personality, our passion, and our prowess, which are the 3 Ps that I put into the authority DNA, I find that that motivation disappears and overwhelm starts stepping in, because the personality piece is the piece many people forget. They think they should be like other people, but I'm introverted in nature, so I can't be on. I'm in fact, inside my book, I shared this example of this diagram and how I filled it in. I'm completely transparent. And at the intersection there of passion and personality, I've got the words fizzy energy, because that's how I show up. I can be on there, I can be full energy, but after, you've got me lying down and saying nothing to anyone. Whereas some other people, they'll be go, go, go all day. That's not me. I'm a fizzy energy bomb, basically.
I probably fall more to your side. I'm more naturally introverted myself, and so I just get to a point where it's like, all right, I'm done with people now, and I need to go and be by myself, and that's cool. You know, I know when those points are for me, and I know that I am one of those people that re-energizes better with quiet time by myself, walks in nature, all those kinds of things. It's good to know. For our listener or even our viewer who's maybe thinking, it's good, framework sounds good. But what exactly are we talking about? Like what is a framework in its most basic level, and how do I start to create my own?
Oh, there's a big question. There's like a whole book in that, John. No, but simply, a framework is a structure that brings ideas together in a way that it's simple for others to understand. And a good framework, there's good and bad frameworks, or the good, the bad, the ugly, in the sense that a good framework is simple, it's clear, it's unique, and it's very specific in helping in a set space. Unfortunately, there's mid-range frameworks that people might go, oh, is that, I've seen someone pick a word and then they basically, it's like alphabet soup in the sense they might go, let's use the word visibility that we've already spoken about. And you might have a visibility, like personal brand expert, and say, my framework is visibility. And then they sit down and go, what can V stand for? What can I stand for? What can S? Oh my, there's another I in there. What can the next I stand for? Oh, and there's another I. Oh, I've got to have 3 eyes. And they're getting lost in that already. And the thing is with AI today, that's the first step. A lot of people go, oh, I'm going to use AI to create my framework. And I'd say, hold back instantly. We can go into that. But the ugly frameworks are the ones like 12, 20 steps. They look more like a process diagram because they're more about the method. Whereas when I mention frameworks, I'm talking about, it's like that 20,000 foot view of what is going to happen. It's a simple map for your clients to understand where you focus, what you specialize in, and what is the journey that we go along. But most importantly, it needs to be based on the impacts that you're actually doing with your clients, not made up. We're uncovering what you are naturally doing. We are not inventing something. So if you want to get started with creating a framework for your business, it's really important to start looking at the patterns that you are already doing and serving in your work. That is the starting point.
Yeah. I think that's particularly helpful because what you're talking about to a greater degree is simplifying things for your audience, your end user, for yourself as well. Most people tend to want to overcomplicate things or make things seem more complicated I think for a number of reasons. A lot of speakers and coaches, they want to share as much value and knowledge as they can, so you end up with 20-point frameworks or whatever else. Or some people just want to seem really clever. Maybe that's a sort of pushback against their own imposter syndrome. I don't know. But there are a number of reasons why sometimes people end up overcomplicating things for people and don't really get the power of simplicity, which we know is important in all levels of communication, right?
Oh, it's not to be underestimated, but equally simplifying is the hardest thing to do for most experts because we've normally got 10, 20, 30 years of life experience behind us. And the biggest issue I see with anyone who's an expert in their space is they've kind of forgotten what it was like to be a beginner. And they start at this really high level. And you're just like, no, like it's really, really hard. And my first training was in design. And so I've got a strong design thinking background. And one of the powers of great design is how you simplify something. So the everyday objects, like one of the reasons why when Steve Jobs took over Apple and he had the iPod that came out, he was like, what is the minimum? If you remember, I'm taking listeners back quite a few years here. The very first one, which was just a small box and it had a circular dial on it. And that was all. That was the only way you can navigate, because Steve Jobs' challenge to his designers is, what is the simplest way we can help people listen to music, have those 20,000 songs in their pocket. And I don't want this thing to be covered in buttons. Creating frameworks for your business is, again, like that. Like, how can we bring it down so it's the essence of what you do? That is what we want to bring forward. And as I say, the designer in me is always wanting to make things look right. And there's a lot of brand recognition and simple structures. We don't need to overcomplicate. Quite often, the simpler, the better, and it's more powerful in the brain.
Yeah. I do sometimes come across people who are resistant to using frameworks. And they just want to get up and speak, and they just want to go with their flow. You would think that would be a mistake, right?
Well, the joy of a good framework is it will give them those beats on stage, because they'll know this is what I need to talk about, because they'll go, actually, the essence of my work, there's a framework for my talk, and I know these are the beats, because I'm sure you agree with this, that the best talks don't feel rehearsed and scripted. They're more someone naturally talking around specific elements. And that is what the framework does for the person on stage. And actually, I know I'm not the only one who's noticed this at conferences. When you're watching great speakers, even if there's been lots of wonderful storytelling and they've got lots of brilliant examples, the moment they bring up their visual framework, because the best speakers all have them, that one slide is the moment you see all the iPhones, all the Android phones, absolutely everything comes out and it's click, click, click. You see, like, pretty much the whole audience these days, they know the moment that visual goes on screen, these are the important moments that we need to remember to take away from this talk. So a speaker who doesn't have a framework is missing that opportunity, because what happens when the audience takes that photo? Goes in their pocket, and it's a lifelong business card that speaker has just dropped into every member of the audience. So you don't necessarily need big call to actions and various things, because you've landed in their heads, and that's where you want to be.
Something that will stay with them. I was thinking, last night I was doing a comedy performance, and whilst there was no frameworks involved, Susanna, there was structure in some and not in others. So for myself, who was opening, and for the comedian who was closing, I noticed that we both had structure to what we talked about. We both had practice. We had rehearsed it. It was a very clear start, middle, and ending to our sets. The sets in between were generally a bit less structured. One particular was especially rambly, and people were tuning out. And I think this is the thing of, like, even just having some structure gives you that. Like, people know where you're going. They can see they're on the journey with you. They have that sense of it. In a more educational or maybe even informative setting that a talk would tend to be, having those sorts of frameworks is a huge advantage for people being able to follow along with the journey, or even see where they're headed. You can kind of get a sense of where you're going to with them as well, right?
Yeah, it's a real speaker's trick to help drop what I would call those curiosity eggs along the way. And as you say, if you know where you're going, you might be dropping the "I'll come back to that later," because then they know you're not going off on a side quest. And one of the experts in the field I see with this is Rory Sutherland, who, to me, he comes across like a bumbling uncle in the corner with endless stories. But he is a master speaker in the sense he would go off down the route and you're thinking, where on earth this is coming? But he's always got a beautiful tie back and brings it together in a way. And so you sort of go on that journey of the storytelling and you're just like, where is this going? But then he will drop those little Easter eggs along the way of, like, this will link in with that. Like, just bear with me. And those little phrases, I noticed they really engage the brain to go, okay, I'm going to keep listening. There's something coming here that I need to keep holding on to that.
Yeah. And that's also more deeply developing a level of trust in that person for being able to do that, that you know they're going to take you somewhere that's worth going to and worth sticking with them for as well. I personally love this, but do all these frameworks need to have a visual element to them as well?
My answer is absolutely yes, wherever possible, because neuroscience and research behind visuals really backs up that they're far more memorable. There's been research studies showing that your talk and any presentation you make will be 65% more memorable 3 days after the event than speaking alone. We process visuals 65,000 times faster than text. So if we don't have the visual element, you're just missing a huge piece of expertise that could land. And that is also where you bring in your brand, your ethos, and how things look. But the visual just makes things memorable. And one of the aspects as well, when it comes to a visual, as I've mentioned, that people can take the photo on the stage, if you're speaking on stage or doing a presentation or even online, that's a piece people are going to screenshot. You might not know it if you're presenting online, but they will be doing that. And then with that, what they have is that element. And you just like go, yeah, that's the visual piece that I'm going to remember. But also more importantly is, do you remember the childhood game of like telephone when you'd whisper something to someone, the person would whisper it to the next person and then you'd like whisper on. And by the end, that message and phrase has changed completely in shape and form. When you have a visual, it's like passing someone a business card that then passes to the next person, and it hasn't diminished at all along that line. So the visual backs up your message and your strategy to really make it memorable, shareable, transferable. Because for me, we are all just one person. We can't be everywhere at once. I mean, I know some people try to be, but that feels exhausting. So we want our message and our impact to go beyond us. And that's where the visual aspect of a framework is so important, because it can travel without your explanation, like embedded. So it's no longer just a performance.
So let's say we've got our framework. We haven't used AI to do it, but we want to have a striking visual framework that we can use in our talks and presentations. What tools do we have available to us? What makes a visually striking framework that we can utilize?
What I recommend, and again, this pulls on, you might hear me reference various psychological tools. And one of my early studies was actually in psychology as well, which is why I do this. But within behavioral science, there is a concept which is about having new but safe things. And you see this across advertising, across marketing. So the safe is using something that is known. And then the new is what you're adding to at the end, added lens. So what I do with frameworks, if you want to get started, I see there's 5 core IP families. And if we use these are the safe known structures that the brain understands instantly. And then the new piece is your process, how you bring your ideas on top of that. So very simply, the first is like a linear roadmap when you've got A to B and there's a couple of points along the way. Any brain that sees that knows, oh, okay, I'm going from here to there. It's a sequence. The next could be a circular, so that mastery comes from repetition. So it could be that your ideas that people need to do a surface level first, then they go deeper with the next layer. And it's very iterative, the circles. Some people, particularly life coaching, happens in that space because there's always extra room for improvement, and probably even speaker coaching, to be honest, that you learn and you learn again. You never stop learning. A good speaker never comes to a standstill. They always lean in. The third version that I talk about is a pyramid, which has layers. One of the most famous, most people recognize is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You start at a base layer, you move to the top, which in Maslow's case is self-actualization, but there's steps along the way. The human brain goes, right, I've got to start at the base, and I know I'm going to the pinnacle at the top. The fourth is, let's take you back to school days and maths. Doesn't everyone love maths? We did Venn diagrams. How many red
Venn
cars, blue cars,
diagrams.
green cars are out there? Again, the Venn. Every child is taught this back in the day in school, but it's a brilliant way that if you bring together different pillars of thought, and where you are working on is bringing those pieces together at the center, then the Venn is a lovely, safe visual mechanism to use. And the last is based on a 2x2 matrix, a square. And with this one, the importance is the axes, because if your work takes you on 2 journeys of transformation that you help and support people with, then being able to map this into a matrix is really easy to understand. The Eisenhower matrix is a very popular one. The do, delete, delegates, and I've forgotten the fourth right now. There's 4 in there, but it's very much, they're easy, simple structures. So I'm not talking about being an artist here. All these you can create on any software, basically. You can even draw it down on a sticky note. And this is one of the elements I encourage everyone when we're talking about simplifying, is simplify down to the size of, a 3-inch square sticky note and see, can you put your ideas to that small for a reason, because it needs to be really simple. And my framework thinking visual is in fact a triangle with one triangle in the middle of it. It's very simple because there's 4 elements within that I ask everyone to look at.
Yeah. One of the reasons I really like this, and I'll tell you one of the things that you're inspiring me to want to do here, Susanna, is one of the things that maybe costs us the most in brain energy each day is task switching. You probably heard of this, but when we change from doing one thing to or thinking about one thing to another, it is quite a big cognitive load that we're using up. I feel like for me, particularly, if I have my frameworks in visual form in front of me on the wall, that's going to save me a lot of cognitive load energy when I'm switching between those or working on different elements of what I'm doing. I really like that. I'm very excited to do that.
Totally. I can see that whiteboard behind you, John, that you totally need to have the drawn structures, and I'm all for pen and paper. Get it out of your head. And in fact, my book on framework thinking, someone asked me the other day, what was the first thing you wrote? Like, how did you start your book? Because obviously a lot of speakers also write a book. They have the book. It's called the expert trifecta in how I describe it, that you have your talk, the book, and the course. And for me, when I had to stop and think, because it was probably a good 14, 15 months ago when I was like, right, this is going to happen. But it started with a sketch. And I've got the sketchbook still, and I went back to it and I opened up on page 1. There was the sketch of me mapping out what were those key elements of framework thinking that I wanted to discuss. Now, interestingly, and I want to share this with the listeners, that even myself, a final framework doesn't come it's not like a magical download that just pops out of your head in perfect finished space. It does need to be worked with and have iteration. And that first iteration, I was actually using the 2x2 matrix because I was thinking, I think there's 4 elements here. So that was a natural first shape to work on. But as I went deeper, I realized it needed to move into the triangular structure, because the 4 elements in it actually are visual recognition at the top, in the top triangle. The bottom left triangle is about impact detection, which I mentioned earlier on, about seeing the patterns that are already there. The bottom right is boundary setting. So important for experts to simplify. You need to know what's in and what's out. But at the heart of it all, and this is the middle sort of upside down triangle, equilateral triangle in the middle, if you're visualizing this one in your head, is transfer integrity. And this is the point where I've mentioned that it's like the business card being passed on. Are your ideas moving outside of the room without you as well? And because I realized transfer integrity, it wasn't on an axis, it wasn't a destination, it's actually at the heart of framework thinking. I was then thinking, okay, so what's a visual that can represent this? And I chose the triangle as well because the triangle is one of the strongest forms in nature. It's very solid and it holds and it lasts the test of time. So it also reflected the values, the ethos, the messaging that I wanted to have behind the framework. And this is where we go deep and why it's far more than having just a word. There are great frameworks which are a word, but if you want to go deep and become really memorable, the biggest ideas have traveled as shapes. People like Simon Sinek's Golden Circles. Even in his TEDx talk back in 2009, when he introduced that, he was unknown at that point. He stepped onto the stage, he had the flip chart, he drew 3 circles, one inside the other, and he started talking. And one of the first phrases, like, go back and listen to this, is he says, I didn't invent this, I've just codified what works in corporations. And that is the start with why. And I call this the golden circle, where you want to be. And it's that codification piece is, as an expert, if you can codify what is happening around you and what you are doing, that is gold in your business that you're missing out on if you haven't done this work yet.
Yeah, I think there's a level to which we naturally assume, whether consciously or not, that somebody being able to simplify something that hasn't been simplified that well before, or codifying it, as you say, in a way that is very understandable and has that visual representation, there is an element to which I think we just trust that takes a specific level of intelligence. There's like a smartness to getting to that. If you can help us understand something that well, we're going to credit you with being some kind of freaking genius because you helped us to understand something more clearly. I think that's almost undoubted in the business.
Totally. I'm just in full agreement with that statement. I'm like, yes.
Let me ask you then. I mean, you mentioned about the AI maybe creating these frameworks and making them not as perfect as we think they might be. If we're going to create our own frameworks, do they need to be acronyms? Do they need to be words? I mean, we see a lot of the good frameworks out there, like your own, that are words that make sense or fit with your brand. But that's not always going to work out that way. As you said, sometimes you end up really forcing it and end up with these very tenuous kind of words in the framework just to get the word. What's the right approach to take then? If you think, oh, I really want it to be this, it's my branding and everything, what am I going to do?
There's 2 approaches to this. A framework always needs a name and a title. So I've got my framework thinking triangle. The 4 elements inside do not create a word. So visual recognition, boundary setting, impact detection, transfer integrity, that does not create a word. That's fine because it works as it is. But the SPARK process, which I take people through, absolutely, SPARK stands for self, premise, art, reach, and kudos. And that has the advantage when you can do that, but you don't want a word more than 5 letters, by the way. Most people fail at this point because it becomes too long. You also need a word where every letter is different. So we're minimizing how many words you could even use with this because you don't want to have any repetition if it's based on your framework. But having a word that is in mnemonic where people can understand and say, oh, what did S stand for? Oh, A is art. And sometimes it lands and it works, is what I will say, but you don't want to force it. For me, it was a culmination, and using the word spark even came up from client and testimonial feedback going, Susanna, you're sparking ideas. You've inspired me. And it became part of it. But when I was looking at, well, what is the process I take people through? It just naturally fell and worked, though I did have to. It took me a little bit, I must admit, when I was going, well, would K work? Until I realized actually kudos. And for me, kudos is the point actually, we're not being positive in the space. That's when the reward and recognition come back to you. So you can't force that element. So the active pieces of the Spark process is actually S, P, A, and R. And that helps people undoubtedly remember and go, this is where I am on the journey. So I'm not anti using that. I'm saying use it when it works and matches. Don't use the word visibility. Don't use like long words with multiple sections if you can help it, because our brains, and again, lots of research have gone into this, 5 or under, 7 maximum. And example, rainbows, right? What colors are in rainbows? As a kid, we then like learn different. I know in my head, I've got Roygbiv. It makes no sense whatsoever, but other people, they have whole sentences instead to remember what it is. But that's because 7 is way harder for our brain to remember. If it's 5 or under, ideally 5, 4, or 3, our brains love to work in threes. So for me, the best frameworks, you're condensing down between 3, 4, or 5 components. And therefore, if you have a word to describe that, let's make sure the word is 3, 4, or 5 letters long with all separate letters as well. So I'm not asking much there, John. If you want a word, it's got to be a specific word.
Yeah, look, I would tend to encourage speakers to go more for around the 5, simply because I think it's always good to have a few elements that you're very clearly not going to cover in your talk, because you're probably only really going to do 2 or 3. But if you do run for more time, you could include a fourth one. Or you could spend a bit more time on the others, but you also have the opportunity, like you introduce the whole framework and people already know that there's more there that you're not going to be covering today. That, hey, we've got 45 minutes, whatever. This is what we're going to cover today, but here's the whole framework. I think that's a really great tool to set things up and to see that idea of, like, especially if you're selling workshops and coaching or any other elements to go with the talk, people know you're not giving them everything right now, because you can't. You want to make sure they get the essence of what they have right now, but you've already planted those seeds. More likely to go, I think we want those other bits as well afterwards.
Give one of the important pieces to remember here, though, is if you've got a framework with 5 pieces, that's the 20,000 foot level. There are sub frameworks, there are pieces below it. So even if you only have a 3-piece framework, you can talk about one, but you're going to have multiple elements underneath. So you might go deep on one and actually share another 2 sub points underneath the one if you've got 3 points, because again, this is the umbrella of literally, I love the umbrella for this reason. It's like you're holding it above your head and people are seeing, this is the overview of your ideas. It's not the nitty gritty detail. You can't share all of that on stage. Yes, you can give the overview of the journey and this is where it's going to go. And I do agree that you want to show, like, even if it's 3, you might only talk about one, but that doesn't mean within the one, you've got multiple depths and layers that you'll have below it to make people understand. Because then they'll go, oh my gosh, if that's under this one, what's happening under 2 and 3? So it can work with 3, 4, or 5 for that reason. But beyond that, yeah, people's brains start to go, I'm in overwhelm. I don't want to work with them. They're going to fire hose me with content and I'm going to end up in a dribbly little heap on the floor.
Frameworks all the way down. But I think that's a great to look at. I clearly haven't got to that part of the book yet. I'm looking forward to when I do. Now, I have the electronic version of your book. I tend to go with those just for ease, but yours might be one of the exceptions where I think I really want the physical copy because it's such a beautiful looking book. I mean, maybe if you have one to hand, Susanna, maybe for our viewers who are watching this on YouTube, or that they can actually see how attractive your book looks.
Yes, I do. In fact, I'm just going to whiz backwards because I'll pull one from my bookcase because I realize the one in front of me is all scrappy. So I will share. So this is the book. It's a square. And you're absolutely right. Like, since I've launched, I've had lots of feedback because one of the advantages of the square format is it's slightly wider and you can see inside there's lots of images and there's examples. And what it will do, if I hold it kind of flat but in the air so you can see, is it will sit open on your desk. So if it's designed to be implementable with practical exercises, so you can have it next to you and work through and do the exercises. Obviously on an ebook, you can have that, up on your screen, on your desktop. But I've already been told that lots of people have been like writing, like people who like to write in books, they will do that. For people who don't, I do have an online book resource where all the exercises you can just download as a separate document. So you can then print that out as well, which with the ebook you can do if you wanted just the exercises. But everyone who holds it goes, oh, it feels really nice because this is the designer in me. I'm a bit of a paper snob as well. It's like it has to be printed on premium paper. And it is full color for that purpose because I love a good book. I've always loved books. And so, again, when I talk about your branding and your values, for me, my brand values equally show in how I've produced the book in that sense because it echoes everything I do. And in fact, can we say, where's the best way? So this is the framework thinking triangle as well, the full triangle and the smaller triangle inside as well, where I go into in depth inside the book.
It was great. Look, it's a very beautiful looking book. And I think even in terms of making things more memorable for people, these are all elements that will do that as well. And I think it's easy to underestimate how much the smaller things that may seem unimportant can make a bigger difference. Now, there's a degree to which I'm all for, like, if that's not where you're at right now, just get the stuff done and get it out there as imperfectly as you want. But when you get to a point where it's like, well, I have a bit more scope and availability to be able to go to do those sort of nice little touches as well. And if that's part of how you like your brand to be, that's what the kind of stuff that makes you stand out. Here's one of the things I really think with this as well. People are trying, this comes up so often on the show, but people are trying to be a version of something very often when they're a speaker or when they're a coach, and not, as you said right from the start, just trying to be themselves. But what they end up doing because of that is making it harder for people to connect with them because they don't know who you are. If you're not showing up as yourself, you're showing up as some idea of what you think you're supposed to be showing up as. That's impenetrable for most people. It's like I say, well, you just seem like this sort of professional, you kind of seem like everyone else. I don't know how to connect and relate to that. All these little elements and things that go into, like, the way you showed up here today, the way you talk about things, the way you present everything is very connectable and relatable, Susanna. And I think a lot of people just don't have that. But I think this is some ways giving people some of the keys to be able to create it.
Thank you for sharing that. And for listeners earlier on in the journey, I'd like to say me today was not me 10 years ago. It's a journey. No one comes out with this. And in fact, for those who I've been working online for over 20 years, but for the first, definitely for the first 12, I was totally hidden in the sense of I wasn't on video, I wasn't on camera. The only time, I mean, yes, I was working on Skype, but that would be for direct clients. There was none of this visibility piece. And I definitely wasn't speaking on stages. Like, it's been a massive journey. And even if I look back to early videos, like for those who are seeing me on camera, or even if you're listening on the podcast and go, yeah, I want to know what she's talking about now, just, take a quick look that you'll see behind me, I've got my blue wall, I've got sparks of stars, I've got lots of multicolored things because even my logo. In fact, there's a set of drawers behind me. Those are the colors of my logo, my branding. But when I started showing up online, that was a white wall. That was a white unit. In fact, it's just like both the bookcase and the unit behind me, they were standard white IKEA units. We've all got them. The Billy bookcase, we all know it. And then I was like, one day, color is something that doesn't cost the world, but makes a massive impact. And there's a whole piece on color psychology I could go into that I absolutely love. And this wall behind me, which is blue with stars, my whole office isn't like that. The other walls are white painted, but they've got lots of things on them because it's my office come studio. As I mentioned, I am an artist as well, but I do that for fun. So you don't need to be an artist to do frameworks. But how you turn up and present, and this is where as well, purposely in branding, you can pick your colors. But I do always encourage people, don't pick necessarily your favorite colors. They might be your favorite colors, but look to the meanings behind them. Think about your audience. What does your audience connect with? How do you want to be presented? There's a reason why, even though it drives me stir crazy, but like LinkedIn and Facebook have pretty much an identical blue. You go to banks and it's more of a navy blue because blues evoke trust. Blues quite often are very much about communication as well. I've picked the more teal turquoise blue because it's more vibrant, it's sparking ideas, but it is about core communication. And I established that as one of the key colors in my branding, which is why when it came to my book, it was also, how do I want to bring in the blue? And in fact, I've got yellow on the book rather than a gold effect, because when you're printing flat, that can be hard and the yellow stands out better. But then when I launched my book at the book launch, I made the joke, and I think this is probably one of the speaker skills I'm sure you share, is if there's an elephant in the room, name it up front. And I had a yellow shirt and a blue cardigan on, exactly the same colors of this. And I was like, yes, this is part of my consistency of showing up. But as an introvert in business, oh God, and we've all been to those horrific networking rooms. And 10 years ago, absolutely. And I still think they exist in a lot of places where everyone rocks up wearing black.
Right.
Maybe if there's a woman in the room, she'll be wearing a red dress because red brings confidence. Black is very much about hiding and being one of the masses. If you rock up in a color that's linked to your branding, one, it opens conversations. I've never had a moment. And before, even if you're not into wearing bright clothes, have an accessory. You might, as a man, I've seen, you get really funky colored trainers these days where you could say, like, if orange is in my brand, you can get orange trainers or green trainers or blue trainers. Color is something you can pick and use. And whether it's on stage and being bold, and that can go throughout your whole brand, but it's not an expensive element to think about and bring consistency to also give that visual imprint. So even before you've got a structure, think, what is the color that really evokes the feelings, the connection, the recognition I want to have? The opposite of this, bro marketers, they always pick red and black. Everyone out there. So look, what are other people doing? Who do you want to feel in the same place with? So please, yes, that's on the visual side, but color is so important. Whether you're speaking on stage, whether it's your outfit, whether it's the back of your presentation slides, if you have slides, if it's your props, you can find props in all sorts of colors. So they could be your signature color. So red is in your brand. Your props could all be red. You could have a red telephone. You could have a red ball. And then that would make that imagery, and when people take photos of you, stand out because you're following through with your branding.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went down a little side quest there, but I find it important.
No, I like that. And why not add a bit of color and brightness into the world? Because we need it. we need that, and it cheers us up a lot of the time. Susanna, I can only highly recommend that people check out your book, and I always appreciate I'm very fortunate that I get to regularly appreciate your insights and your expertise. But now my audience, my listener, can get to appreciate your excellence and expertise as well through your book. But there are probably other ways they can connect with you if they'd like to find out more about frameworks, about the Spark framework and what you do. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they'd like to know more about what you do?
Well, the easiest way to remember when you're listening is if you go to frameworkthinking.uk. That takes you to my website and talks about the book. When you're on my website, you can navigate around. I've got lots of open articles as well. And if you're on LinkedIn, I do rather like LinkedIn connections. So find me at Susanna Reay and tell me, share that you've heard me right now on this podcast with John, and share what your takeaways are, because I know we'd both love that. So just reach out, connect and say, I heard you on John's podcast.
Good way to do it. Susanna, I really appreciate everything you shared today. It's been a pleasure to finally get you onto the show. And I hope that we can have you back again in the future to come and share some more excellence in frameworks and all your other areas of expertise. Thank you for bringing your sparkle today, and go out and get the book, get the framework thinking, because this is really important and it will potentially revolutionize how you are sharing your information. I've been reading Susanna's book, and I'd say it's one of those books that, would I recommend it to every speaker? Absolutely. Every professional speaker should read this book. Got it on digital first, but then Susanna very kindly sent me a copy. It's a gorgeous little book. It has lots of beautiful illustrations inside. It's very high quality paper. If you like having nice things, I do recommend getting the physical copy. Now, of course, if you want to contact Susanna and get one directly from her, she might even sign it for you. Now, of course, you can go and work with Susanna in real life, and I would recommend it if you really want to turn up your game with your frameworks and sparkle yours out with Susanna's expert attention. You'll find all the details for how to contact Susanna in the show notes. Now, I probably will put out an announcement about this, but for you who's listened this far, I don't know if this is a reward or not, but you get to know first before anyone else. So I've decided to cut back the output of this show to just 2 episodes a month. So for the time being, you'll still get a guest chat and a solo episode, but every 2 weeks now instead of weekly. And that is as of now. So next week, no episode, but we'll be back again in a couple of weeks' time. However, I am putting out more speaking business and speaking related content on LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok. So please make sure you are following me on one of those channels. I'm also putting out some exclusive content on my YouTube channel. If you'd like to access any of that and won't be coming to the podcast at all, it's completely separate. You'll find links in the show notes, and I'll still be doing the Serious About Speaking newsletter on LinkedIn every week. So basically, it's just about time management, activeness as well. This show is a lot of work to make and to produce, and I really need to focus on growing my own coaching and speaking business, not so much on growing the podcast, at least for the foreseeable future. So that's all from me for this week, but have an amazing week. Go and do something worth talking about. I'll see you next time.